So, hi everyone. So, we are now going to talk about the new topic. It's lecture 17 in the course Indian Economy, some contemporary perspectives. Now, when I was going through a book, I found that on services sector we hardly have a completely outlined chapter in any book. They normally mention about information communication technology and certain developments. So, I thought it will be good if I cover this particular topic, because we have a lot if you go through the existing literature, then you find that you have a lot of papers written on industrial growth and development, but services is somewhat missing, though in economic survey now we have started writing a separate chapter on services sector. So, if you go to the Ministry of Finance website, and if you just search for older surveys, then you find that they have from since 50s, and if you just go through those economic surveys, then you find that as we have gone for diversification of activities, we have each and every component added with detail in economic survey. So, now we write a separate chapter on economic survey on services sector in volume 2. And this particular sector is important because it contributes about 55% in the GDP. It is one of the largest receivers of FDI, foreign investment, and it is also one of the sectors where we find a lot of gender equity. So, if you think in terms of workforce, mainly from the perspective of male and female, then we find that services sector has empowered the female working population. So, about more than 30% of the workforce in the services sector, mostly in IT and BPO sector, is the female workforce, and that gives us the idea that apart from micro, small, medium enterprises that we just had discussed in the last session, we find that this particular sector is also very useful. Unfortunately, this sector has not contributed that much to the employment scenarios, as we see if you compare with agriculture and manufacturing, but in terms of overall exports, in terms of foreign investment, in terms of share in the GDP, this particular sector now comes out to be the leading sectors. There are a lot of success stories about this particular sector, because this particular sector is now dominated by business processing and the financial services and even the IT services. But apart from this, in this particular sector we also include tourism, insurance, now we have space services included. So, overall in the contemporary context, if you ask, then services sector is a well diversified sector, and it has a lot of components to cover, and there are some initiatives undertaken by government to revive this, not only in terms of just thinking about this particular sector from the perspective of income generation, but also from the perspective of contributions. So, we will be highlighting each and everything, but first let me give you the readings that I found it is very useful. So, for this particular lecture I have referred economic surveys 2014-15, 2016-17, then we have then 2018-19, and the recent survey 2019-20. Then I found very good article written by Karki and Cameron. It has appeared in Economic Political Weekly, and this particular I would request everyone to please go through this particular article, Designing Policy Initiatives in Emerging Economic Environment, the case of Indian computer hardware industry. And this particular paper takes you to the historical development that we had undertaken, why we had gone for such type of drastic measures, what were the requirements, when we started entering into the hardware industry, computer industry, how India had to progress from a USSR model to the market oriented, the role of private sector you will find. Then Berry, H.N. Green and Poonam Gupta have a very good paper on exports of services, Indian experience in perspective. So, this has appeared in Indian Growth and Development Review. This is also very good reference. Then I found Gordon and Gupta, Understanding India's Services Revolution in India's and China recent experience with reforms and growth. So, it has also appeared as a chapter. Now, I find Arpita Mukherjee recently written article which is very good. This is about the service sector in India. it has appeared as the working paper, ADB working paper. So, on services sector, though you have a lot of options to read, you can go through different web pages and also the online sources and even the newspapers, news dailies. But I find these references very useful, and one should refer these references before going through any, to have a complete idea about the India services sector growth. So, let us start with the idea. So, the idea in this particular topic from my side, it is just to give you an overall idea about the nature of growth of service sector in India, to analyze the recent trends, recent measures, and I would also like to focus on the concerns that we have. So, though Government of India has introduced certain measures like for example, Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, but there is a lot of concern about the services sector revival, because there is a skilling and reskilling concerns, that how we can reskill our workforce, large workforce, to support the major changes that we are observing in case of services sector. So, some of the highlights of the service sector that I found, I thought I should be mentioning it here. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, the India services sector contributes around 55%, and in 2020, as per the 2020 data, it is having 55% share. The size of service sector is around US $1,000 billion, and exports and import, if you see, then we are the net exporters. So, 16.44 USD billion dollar was the exports and 9.60 was the imports. The sector is also one of the largest receivers of foreign direct investments. So, it is also in terms of the amount, it is around $84 billion, and the most attractive sectors that we can see these days are the telemedicine, home health care, and the information technology business processing that you have. It is also one of the IT BPM that I just mentioned, information technology business process management. It is one of the leading subsectors in services sector. It is having the growth rate of 7.7% with the income of around 1.191 billion. IT industry generated the revenue of around $44 billion, and this has export revenue of around 147 billion. So, these are the recent figures that you can get anywhere. If you search online, then you will find that these numbers will come up automatically. I have taken some numbers from the IIBF online source, and also I have referred some portions from the recent economic survey. So, this is not a very big development that we can see. Let us talk about the historical perspective. So, now we have the historical perspective, that in the beginning when we were talking about when we were more focusing on the industrialization process, then at that time service sector was a minimal role. So, that we will be discussing, but before that I will be going back to historical perspective. So, before that, let us have some kind of background of this. So, for the first time, services sector was having a clear cut outline, and it was part of the NIC, the National Industrial Classification 2008, that gave a separate definition of the services sector. It included all the activities that should be part of the service sector. So, we have mentioned that the 7th schedule of the constitutional amendments mentions about the union list, state list, and concurrent list. So, we find that telecommunications, postal, broadcasting, then we have the financial services and national highways, mining services are part of the union list, which means that the central government will have full control on these subsectors of the services. State list includes healthcare services, real estate, hunting and forestry, and in terms of professional services, education, printing and publishing, electricity part of the concurrent list, which means the state list basically includes healthcare and real estate. Rest all are in the central list, and the state and the center both have jurisdiction. I would say jurisdiction on in terms of the services like professional services, education, printing and publishing, electricity. These are the concurrently, which means that state and center both will have jurisdiction in this particular list. Now, if you trace the history, so now we have already have a complete idea about that how we have gone for industrialization process. So, from second 5-year plan onwards, we started emphasizing on the different planning processes leading to heavy industrialization. But during 1950s, if you just think in terms of the share of the agriculture, so agriculture was the highest in 1950s, followed by it was services again, and industry was lower. So in services you have storage and we had transport and all these subsectors of the services leading. But when it came to 1970s, then this particular sector had a volatile situation, because at that time we had gone for heavy regulation. In the 1980s era, when we had gone for MRTP relaxations, and then we had also gone for promotion of investment, delicensing, we had also gone for enactment of Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, that also led to the surge in activities in the services sector. So from that onwards, we can see it is continuously going up, though there was stagnant period, but though the growth was not that high. So you can see here that this period we don't have that much growth, but after 1980s we can see that it is going upward because of the certain policies that we undertook for the revival of the services sector. So the liberalization measures that we discussed during 1980s, it gave boost to the services sector also. So whatever measures that we had undertaken in terms of revival of industrial sector, in turn it also benefited the services sector, mostly in terms of import of technology, and this import of technology further enhanced the capabilities, local capabilities, and that further helped in attracting a large number of FDI into this. So the later industrial policies were more of a market oriented, and then we were in the 1990s, and in 1990s we took radical measures to revive the industrialization process, and then we also had to go through opening of the economy. So at that point of time, services sector has the major leap, and then it continued the growth. So we had a sustained growth in the services sector after that, because then we had the role of private sector playing, and post 2000 it was the golden era. So that's the whole, I would say, chronology of the services sector that we find in India. So then post 1990s we saw the incorporation of certain activities in the services sector, and then post 2000 we had the whole lot of post .com bubble bust developments that further enhance the business services processing industries, and then also we had the telecommunication, then we had financing, insurance, real estate, business services flourishing. So post 2000 we did not see a services sector going down anywhere, and that led to the one of the major successes of the India's economy. Many argue that unlike conventional Asian economies, where we had the pattern of growth in the sense that first the agriculture sector was given a focus, then it moved to the industry, and then it moved to the services. But in case of India, we did not see that. We saw that the agriculture sector was the major, we were mostly agrarian economy, and in 1970s we were just struggling with our own setup, whether we should go for more market oriented or we should remain with that, and then we focus more on the public sector socialist rule, or I would say socialist form of the economic setup. But then post 1980s, when I realized that we did not do well because of those control measures, then we started liberalizing, and as a result services sector came up as one of the champion sectors at that point of time, one of the champions at that point of time, and that continued. And one of the reasons why people say that though India moved from agriculture to services directly with not so much focus on the manufacturing, and that has resulted in terms of income share, in terms of income growth, though services sector has contributed a lot. So it can be called as a net gainer, but in terms of employment it has not contributed that much, and that is one of the concerns for the India's economy, that in terms of employment growth, employment generation, we did not see that much coming from the services, though post 2000 we had for few years we had a bunch of people joining the services sector, mostly IT and telecom, and that also contributed a lot. But compared to Asian countries experience where the manufacturing had a main say, the amount of employment created for the skilled and semi skilled workforce, it is much higher compared to India, because services sector requires some kind of specialized skilled force, and that we started generating that kind of workforce only post 2000. So, in the beginning it was really difficult, and our economic policy was also not reoriented. So, we had to refit our economic model, and when our focus was that we should be focusing on the industrialization process, and we will be liberalizing the economy and having a competitive advantage in terms of industrial growth. But services sector came up as one of the surprising development, and the growth and the development in this particular sector contributed a lot, and that is why it is called that the service sector became one of the champions, and then though the focus of the policy maker was on the industrial So, at that point of time, post 2000, this is the scenario that we can see. The agriculture sector, the industry sector, we see more or less stagnant. The agriculture sector, we find it is completely downward. So, now you can see that this particular sector had a complete downward fall, but in terms of food availability, food production, though we increased, but in terms of share it has come down. So, from 55 million ton to we have now 290 plus million tons, and in terms of share also it is almost continuously on a declining mode. So, this is one concern that I find. In terms of average growth, if you find, then in case of agriculture it was just from 1951 till 2000. If you compare, we had 1951 to 1982.1. Industry we had 5.3, 6.8, 5.8. In services, you can see here you have the major difference, that industry and services both in 1981 till 1990 both were doing at the same rate, but after when we liberalized our economy, the service sector outsmarted the industry, and here we have in industry we have 5.8% and in services 7.5%. So, which means that the era we had in 1981 to 1990, though the focus was more on the industrialization process, giving more leeway to the market oriented development, services sector came up as one of the surprising development, and that led to because we had liberalized our in terms of foreign investment, in terms of delicensing, we had also opened the sectors for the private sector, and that private sector had given a lot of opportunity for the growth and development in the services sector. So, this is what you can see, that though the GDP growth remains same 5.8, 5.8 during these two periods, but in services sector jumped after. So, during this decade it can be called a services sector decade from 1991 till 2000. Now, I also got this from the paper, this table, and if you find, then in 1950s the community, personal, social services, trade, hotel, restaurant, transport, storage and communication. So, if you think in terms of share, in 1950s the share in services, which is this particular part, it was 35%, 25% and 28%, right. But here if you think in terms of trade, hotels and the restaurants, so this is the GDP share. So, 10.4, 7.5, 8.5 and 3.4, and this is the share in services that we had. So, out of the service sector, so this is how it was distributed at that point of time. In 1970s also it was 35.1, in 1990s, so we have decline. What we can see is that there is a consistent rise in the share from trade, hotel and restaurants, and then we have a trade, transport, storage and communication. So, it has expanded. So, here you can see 28.5, then we see a jump in during 1970s 30.2, then again we see some stabilization 28.5, and then we have 29.4. So, the major leading sectors if you see, then it became the finance, insurance, real estate, business services 27.3, trade, hotel and restaurant it is 29.4, and in terms of share in the GDP share, if you find, then you find that finance, insurance, real estate, business services sector has done well, and even trade, hotels and restaurant has done well. The transport storage did not do well. Transport storage did well only in 1950s, then it continued, but after that the share has come down, though in terms of GDP share it is up, but here we have only in 1950s we have the share of community, social and personal services 35%. 70s again we have 35.1, then we have 90s going down again. So, overall it looks like that there is a whole lot of transformational change in the services sector, the basket of services subsectors that we have, and we have more moving towards financing, insurance, real estate and business services that we find it here. So, the overall this I just mentioned that if we want to see the decadal change barring 1980s, then we have a major change happening after 2000. In 1990s we found community financing and all remaining the same, and this continuation is now, even today this continuation is leading. So, finance, insurance, real estate, business services is leading, trade, hotels and restaurants are also leading. Now, coming back to the argument that the services sector has not contributed that much to the economy in terms of employment generation. So, if you look from the perspective, then it appears that in 1965-66 we had the growth rate in employment around share employment around it was around 18.1, right. Then it came to 20 point, then we had 1980, 81, 89. In 99 2000 we had 23.5. In terms of, if you compare in terms of the investment gross capital formation, then we find that it is declining, but in terms of employment share it has gone up, but it is not that high that we expected, and that we have the potential to generate that kind of employment in manufacturing and other sectors. So, this particular aspect is one of the hotly debated topic. Sometime economists argue on this, that we should have focused more on the manufacturing. Here in terms of the labor productivity I have just mentioned here. So, in terms of labor productivity, if you see, then what appears that during 1984 to 2010, here in terms of growth, if you see, then it appears that the services had the growth of 4.9%, and here it is 6.3, which has gone up. Manufacturing it is less, 3.7, 4.2. In terms of services subsectors, if you compare, then we have the trade, hotel and restaurant, as I told in the previous slide, it is rising up 7.3. In transport, storage and communication, it is 3.6, 4.5. Again, in terms of financial services, insurance, it has come down from 2000 to 2010, it has come down minus 1.6. We can see another real estate and business services, though it was negative in 1984, during 1984 2010, but it has gone up further. We also see construction sector contributing a lot, but we do not see financial services and insurance doing that much till 2010. But now we can see that since these are highly I would say techno oriented sectors, so automations and all are having a higher chances that this will be replaced, but till 2010 this particular sector was in negative, but post 2010 it must be having a better scenario. So, overall it looks that among the subsectors in services, we find trade, hotels and restaurants as attractive, and then we also find trade, storage and communications quite attractive, 4.5, it has gone up, but in terms of financial services and insurance we do not find. So, this is what we say that. So, in terms of productivity, this distribution shows that in certain sectors the expansions were more. So, maybe when we have a middle class rising, so if you have a per capita income rising, so this particular sector is expected to rise. So, trade, hotels and restaurants are expected to rise, and this is what we find it here also. Transport, storage and communications, we again see increase. In terms of export compositions, if you see in terms of export composition, then we find that software was the leading at that point of time, 1991 it has a share of 44%, travel was 32%, then by 2001 it reduced. So, it is from 22 to 22% to travel reduced to 22%. Software alone became 41% share, and software services now it is having by 2010-11 it has the share of 48%. So, this means that software plus miscellaneous, all other services were included. Here we can see that the software has taken over. So, now it is 48%, which means that in this particular subsector, this particular sector expanded much better than all other sectors. So these charts helps us understand that how was the comparison of exports that we have. So if you compare the 2010-11 scenario, then it must be called or the transformation that we can see from 1990-91 2001, that we can say that it was also because of the policies that we had undertaken. So at that point of time, the architecture of the software industry, it was such that it was more supported by the government, and even the fortunate part was that we had a dynamic individual supporting this particular sector and thinking about the expansion of this particular sector. So if you go through the IT industry revolution in India, then one person name is always mentioned, which is Devang Mehta. Devang Mehta helped a lot in terms of boosting the IT sector in India, because he was the NASSCOM chairman, and then he became one of the most stalwarts in terms of thinking about the India's IT industry, because he has the proper vision of leading the IT sector, not from the perspective of just for exports, but he was also the one who thought that it has huge potential even in domestic economy. So computer as a major economic superpower, Devang Mehta helped a lot. So some people, they also even argue that the Congress government at that time, though they had introduced some measures that we will be discussing now, though they had introduced some measures, but it was also the role of Devang Mehta, who was untimely death led to the further. It was said that if he would have continued, then the IT sector would have been somewhere else. But it also shows that this sector was headed by a right mindset of people, and that's why this particular sector had that much growth. So here it is, in terms of software we have 41%, and in terms of software services we can see that by 2010-11 we reached to the financial and miscellaneous business services 26%, software services it reached to 48%. So in the next session I will be talking more about the development. So overall you can see that the composition that we have for the services sector, it looks more skewed towards the software exports, and even in terms of business processing and real estate, and then we have the trade, hotels, and the sector of restaurants, food industry supporting more. Going ahead, this particular sector has immense potential to contribute to the GDP growth, but there are certain requirements that we will be discussing in the next session. Thank you so much.